Hello everyone and welcome back to the vlog. I honestly just want to say how grateful I am that so many people watched the video. You know, when me and my friends were making this video and this vlog, we really didn't think we were gonna get that many views. We were thinking we were gonna get around 50 views or 100 views, if that. But our first video actually ended up having 1,500 views at the time of recording this video. And for that, I thank everybody out there. I didn't think anybody was interested in watching these videos, and I actually got a lot of helpful comments that kind of showed me, you know, some mistakes I'm making, helped me learn, and even one about game selection that I'm actually really taking into consideration into adding into my game. These hands I'm about to show you are going to be hands played kind of a while ago. I'm recording this in around mid to late August. These hands are going to be like early June, so it's been a little bit of time. I will say that after this and our next video, we're going to be caught up on our backlog, so we're going to be jumping forward a decent amount of time to the present day, so you can get a little bit of an idea of how my poker game is in this current moment. But regardless, I hope you guys enjoy the vlog. I really appreciate the comments. If you want to see more and see me improve, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next couple of hands. Welcome to the first hand of the vlog. We're in the small blind with pocket sixes. Under the gun 1, low jack, both limp, and we decide to raise it up to $15. The big blind folds, and under the gun 1 decides to call, and then the low jack folds behind. Going into this hand, under the gun 1 has around $200 behind, and we have around $250. The flop comes queen, 7, 10, rainbow. We decide to raise for $12, and then the villain calls. Turn comes a 9 of clubs, bringing in a backdoor flush draw and completing a few straight draws. So we decide to check back here, and the villain decides to check. On the river comes the 7 of diamonds. We decide to raise it up for $40. I think this bet is a little bit too big. This is honestly a card that we wouldn't expect to get very many calls from, since, you know, all straight draws and sets are 100% going to be betting on the turn. They don't have a lot of hands here. I think my original plan was to get rid of 10x, but I don't think we need to go that big to get rid of 10x. I think 10x will fold to a raise of like $20 or $25. No reason to go so big, but that's what we do in game, and then the villain folds. The next hand is an interesting one. We wake up in the low jack with pocket aces. We decide to raise it up for $10, which is going to be our standard raise sizing, and then the big blind calls and the small blind call. For reference, the hero stack is going to be around $300, with the button having around $140 behind, and then the small blind having $500 behind. The flop comes queen of hearts, 2 of hearts, 6 of diamonds. The small blind checks to us, and we decide to raise for $12. Now, I'm not so sure about this sizing. I think this is a fine size. We want to build the pot. We almost always have the best hand, but I think that we can even get a little bit more value. All queen X are going to call a bigger bet, all flush draws are going to call a bigger bet, and we really want to be pricing or charging our opponents for continuing here. So instead of $12, I much prefer like some amount like $20 or even pot like $24, but regardless, we decide to raise for 12 and we get 2 callers. The turn comes a 7 of clubs. The small blind decides to check to us, and then we decide to raise it up to $30. Similarly to like what I said on the flop, I think we can definitely be going for a slightly bigger sizing here. The pot is around $58, and I think all queen X are going to call around $45. All flush draws are probably going to continue for that price, even though they're not necessarily getting the odds, and we really want to be building the pot and trying to play for stacks. The button folds, the small blind decides to re-raise us for $60, a min click. Now, honestly, in-game, I had no idea what to do here. I think that I was worried that this is indicative of a strong hand because people under check raise. So we just decide to call. I think we might even be able to get away with a raise in some potentials here and a 3-bet, but that could also just be hindsight. But in-game, we decide to call. The river comes the Queen of Clubs, perhaps the worst card to come in the deck for us, and the villain decides to raise for 106. Now, with pocket aces here, we have to really evaluate what can my opponent have. They can't really have hands like pocket kings, pocket jacks, because one, they wouldn't take this line. For example, pocket kings would probably 3-bet pre-flop, pocket jacks probably wouldn't want to put so much money in. The same is true for the other pocket pairs below pocket jacks. So what does that really leave him with? Is he really going to end up making this bet with a busted flush draw? I think most of the time, no. I think most of the time he only has a Queen X that is going for value. So in this case, we should 100% be folding, but unfortunately, Past Sean makes a grave error and calls. We're married to our pocket aces, and he turns over his hand, which is Queen of Diamonds, 10 of Clubs. I think overall, I played okay. It's hard to misplay a hand like this with a safe flop and a safe turn, but the river is where I really lost a lot of money, and I think I definitely could have gotten away from this one. The next hand, we are in the under the gun 1 position with pocket kings. Under the gun decides to limp, and we decide to raise for $10. This is definitely a sizing error. I think what happened in game was I didn't realize that the player behind me limped, but regardless, we go for 10. Usually we'd go for size like 15, but regardless, we get so many callers. The hijack, the button, the small blind, and the under the gun player all decide to call. We're off to a flop of Queen of Clubs, 4 of Hearts, and 9 of Hearts. Very safe flop for pocket kings. So when we get checked to by the small blind and the under the gun position, we decide to raise it up for $20. It's around half pot, and the reason why we kind of go so small is in multi-way, our equity is pretty limited. We sized down a little bit compared to the last hand where we wanted to go big in this spot because there's too many people inside of the pot. So we get a fold from the hijack, the button calls, and then everyone else folds. We're off to a turn of the 2 of Hearts. We decide to check to the in position player, and they only have around $96 behind. They decide to shove all in. We have the King of Hearts, and I kind of go into the tank for a little bit here. The villain is a tight player. They almost never raise pots, and they are really tight post-flop. They don't go for many bluffs. When our opponent decides to overpot, I don't really know what to do. We have a strong hand that has a lot of equity, but what can he really have in this situation? I think there's a lot of ace-queen that we're beating here that doesn't like the hearts. My concern with that was I don't even know if he would shove ace-queen here because he is scared of the flush. I find that players are more scared of flushes than scared of like the 4-card flush coming in, but that might be a misread. Regardless, we put him kind of on a strong range since he's a relatively tight player, and we decide to fold our pocket kings. Now, this is probably a mistake. I've had a couple of people tell me that this was not a good play, but regardless, we try our best at an exploitive read. In the next hand, we're in the low jack with the King of Hearts, Jack of Spades. We decide to raise it up for $10 and the cutoff calls and everyone else folds. The flop comes Jack, 9, 7, monotone, all hearts. We have the King of Hearts, so we feel pretty safe in this situation, but we are still out of position versus a cold caller, so we decide to check to the villain. They decide to raise it up for $15 and we're not going anywhere. Our hand isn't necessarily strong enough to check raise though, so we decide to just call. The turn comes the Jack of Clubs. We decide to check to the villain, and then the villain decides to raise for $20. Now we go for a weird play here where we check raise this opponent for $55. I think this is pretty good. I think we have a lot of Jack X that's going to call us. I think our check raise sizing is a little bit weird. It's not even a full pot size. So because of that, I think we should be going for like maybe 70, 75 here. But regardless, I think the check raise is good. We're getting value from a decent amount of hands and our opponent is going to call. The river comes the 2 of diamonds, and we have a blocker to the flush. We have one of the strongest jacks in there. Our opponent can put in a decent amount of money here. We decide to go all in. Just so we know that this isn't like a huge all in, our villain only has around $95 behind, so she should pretty much be calling with any 2 cards here, and we show King Jack and take down the pot. Now, if you've come to see me punt off my stack and make huge blunders, this is the hand for you. We're in the button with 5-4 offsuit and then the cutoff limps. We decide to raise it up to $12 and the big blind and the cutoff call. The flop comes ace, jack, 3, two-toned. We get checked to, and we think this is a pretty good board for us. We don't have a lot of equity, we know we can't win at showdown, and we have some draws to improve. So we decide to raise it up for $15. I think this is a mistake. I think this is a hand that we definitely should not be raising pre-flop. Additionally, when we come to this flop, we should just truly be giving up with our weak hand. But regardless, the big blind folds and the cutoff calls. The turn comes the ace of hearts, completing a flush draw. Now, the cutoff decides to check to us, and we think that this card is pretty good for us. We think that our opponent is going to raise us with a lot of ace X, a lot of 2 pairs plus. We think he's kind of capped on the flop. And we think that the ace makes it difficult for him to have another ace. It removes some ace X from his range. So knowing that, we decide to bump it up and raise for $30. The villain calls. That analysis that I just gave, I think was a mistake. I think our opponent 100% can have ace X here because they are not usually check raising enough. Even when they have a value hand, they usually don't check raise. So I don't actually think our villain is capped in this situation. But regardless, that is the bet we make. The cutoff decides to call, and the river comes the 4 of clubs. We get checked to, and we have a decision. We know that our hand has 0 showdown value. Because of that, we decide to go for a ginormous bet. We go for a bet of $157 over pot. And for us, that's all in. Now, what's really funny is that our villain really just slow rolls us. He takes forever and takes about a minute to come to a decision if he's gonna call us or not. And then when he does call, he has ace 3 he has a full house. And I looked at his bet and I'm like, wow, it took you a really long time to call. I mean, full house is practically the nuts in this situation. We lose, we run into top of range. I think this is a hand we shouldn't be doing this with. I don't think we should also be barreling it off into these opponents that, you know, quite frankly, play a little bit different than we may be used to. They're not going to be value betting enough. They're not going to be thin valuing enough. So because of that, we had no idea what his hand strength was on the river. We had a general guess, but we didn't actually have an accurate guess. So honestly, that first session was a little bit rough. We were in for $600 and out for $514, meaning that we rebought and built a little bit of a stack, which I guess I can be a little bit happy about, but we didn't actually make money on the day. We did play for around 9 hours, which is insane to think about because we usually play much shorter sessions. But regardless, let's get into the next day of hands. We're on to a new session, and hopefully this one's a little better. For the first hand of the day, we're in the big blind with Queen 9 of hearts. The low jack raises for $7, and there are 3 callers. The cutoff, the button, and the small blind. We're in the big blind, and we decide to raise it up for $45. Now let's discuss this 3-bet. I'm not a huge fan. I think at the time we had some of these 3-bet bluffs that we're going to be 3-betting very frequently, almost like we would when we had a really strong hand. I think I made a little bit of a misevaluation. I think Queen 9 isn't a good 3-bet bluff. I think we'd much rather be 3-bet bluffing with hands like Ace 5, Ace 7, Ace 4, things kind of like that. I think Queen 9 doesn't have enough blocker properties and doesn't really play well enough post-flop. But regardless, we decide to 3-bet for some egregious amount, and everybody folds except for the small blind. Now, we don't need to be good at poker when we flop trips. The flop comes queen, queen, 5, two-toned. See, the game of poker is easy when you just drill strong hands. Anyways, the villain decides to check to us and we decide to raise it up for $30. Now, there's a world where we potentially could have gotten more money here, but in these situations, usually what will happen is we'll go for like a small and frequent c-bet, and that's what we do here. The villain decides to call. The turn comes the King of Hearts. Villain checks to us, and now we need to be getting more value. I think our hand is super strong, and the King of Hearts is probably one of the best cards that can come because a lot of his hands actually improve, and we should be able to stack off with a lot of King X. We decide to raise for $65 in this situation, which I think is a mistake. I think we need to be going a lot bigger to be setting up a river shove. I think the proper size here is around $100 so we can set up the SPR to be less than 1 on the river, and so that our opponent is truly going to have to call with any King X. But that's not what we do. We raise for 65 and the villain decides to just snap call it off. The river comes the 2 of clubs, and honestly, I make a huge mistake, and when the villain checks to us, we decide to check it back. This is a huge error, and I'm actually really upset at myself for this. I think this is a very clear bet for value. A lot of King X are going to call us, a lot of non-believers are going to call us, and given the action pre-flop, it's very unlikely for this opponent to have 2-pair or sets here, and they do have those in their range, let's be clear, but most of their range is just going to be garbage King X, which are clearly beat by our Queen X. So we decide to check it back, we show him our Queen, and he has King Jack of Spades. We missed a street of value. A couple of hands later, we're in the small blind with Jack 10 suited. Under the gun 1 decides to limp, and then the low jack raises to $6. We decide to 3-bet to $24. This is also one of our 3-bet bluffs. I like this 3-bet bluff a little bit better. I think it plays fine post-flop when compared to Queen 9, which doesn't have a lot of playability. It can't make very many straights, and when it does make a flush, we're actually scared we're beat when the pot grows too much. Jack 10 is a little bit better because it's connected, and it allows us to create more post-flop bluffs. We get a fold from the big blind, and then under the gun calls, and then the low jack folds. We have a stack of around $350, and the villain has around $115 behind. The flop comes 9 of spades, 2 of clubs, 5 of diamonds. We decide to lead pretty small. I think leading in 3-bet pots is fine. I'm not a huge fan of c-betting on a non-face card board. I think face card boards were going to generate a lot more folds, and with this specific hand, we don't have a lot of ways to improve. The villain decides to call. The turn comes to 6 of spades, and on the flop, I told myself that if we improve to a straight draw or a flush draw, we would continue barreling it off with this specific holding. And that's exactly what happens when the 6 of spades rolls off. I think this is a great card for us. While our opponent is potentially more weighted towards these lower cards, because this is a 3-bet pot, it's actually very unlikely he connects with this in any way, shape, or form. So we decide to raise it up for $65. I think this is also kind of a mistake. I don't think we need to go this big. Again, similar to one of the hands we discussed previously, I think the difference between 40 and 65 is very negligible. When we're bluffing, I think we have the same amount of fold equity, and I don't think it's changing. So we'd rather save ourselves money when we do run into top of range. We'd rather save ourselves money when we're bluffing off. And is this readable? Yes, but are opponents really paying attention to our sizings on these turns and rivers? Probably not. But regardless, we decide to raise it up for $65, and the villain folds. In the next hand, we're in the big blind with King 8 of hearts. The hijack decides to raise for $13, and we decide to call. Honestly, I think this might have been a little bit of a loose call. I think in a high rake environment, we should be defending a little bit less. However, I think this player is a little bit more aggressive. He's a young Asian male who's shown aggression at the table, and because of that, I think we have some opportunities to play him post-flop. The flop comes 10, 5, 5. Now, on these boards, if I were him, I would be c-betting very frequently. So because of that, we decide to check and do something a little bit sneaky. Our plan here is to actually go for some kind of check raise play here, knowing that he might overstab this board. But it doesn't happen, and it goes check, check. The turn comes the 8 of spades. We now have turned some equity. Now our game plan changes. When we check, we're doing it for pot control. We're not doing it to check raise and bluff him off of a hand. We don't want to bloat the pot too much that we're almost always going to be at showdown. So we decide to check, planning to check call this spot. The villain decides to check back, and then the river comes the 7 of clubs. Now, we can try to get some value here. We decide to raise for $21, a little bit below pot. My logic here is I think our opponent has shown that he does not have 10x, he's not going to have jacks plus, and probably the best hand he's going to have here is going to be pocket 9s. Sometimes he'll have ace 8 here and beat us that way. I think the more likely case here is that he's going to have like a lot of marginal hands, maybe lower pocket pairs or hands that, you know, might actually call a bet to try to bluff catch me on the river. I've shown at this table that I'm a pretty aggressive player, so I wouldn't be surprised if someone tried to play back at me. And then he decides to re-raise us for $45. I mean, honestly, the raise was so small that I didn't even consider folding. This feels like a bluff. I mean, I'm not necessarily sure what hands would want to go this small. I think if he actually had a value hand, he'd go much bigger, trying to target a lot of my exact hands or pocket 9s. So we decide to call, and he just instantly mucks his hand, which I love, and we take down the pot. Now this is a hand that we might be getting a little bit too aggressive in. We're in the button with ace 6 of spades. Under the gun and under the gun both limp, and we decide to raise for $15. We get a call from the small blind and the under the gun, but the under the gun one player folds. The flop comes 7 of spades, jack of clubs, 10 of hearts. The small blind decides to raise it up for $15, and we decide to re-raise him for $45. Honestly, don't know why I decide to go so aggressive. I might have had some kind of read on this opponent. I think this is a pretty big punt, and we should almost never be raising in this manner. But that's what we do, and our opponent open folds king, jack, off. We got top pair second best kicker to fold, which I think is quite literally insane. So maybe I did have a read, but regardless, I would not do this against a general opponent, and I definitely should not be doing this versus a general opponent. This is the final hand of the session, and we wake up with pocket jacks. Under the gun decides to limp, and under the gun 1 decides to raise for $17. Now, a couple of assumptions about this player. This player is relatively tight and does not raise very often, especially from early position. Additionally, this player isn't going to raise for this size very often. Usually their sizing is going to be somewhere between like $10 or $6, but $17 is just raising alarm bells in our head. It's making me think he only has premium hands here. Now, with that, since we have pocket jacks, I think we have a pure fold. I think if we're going to put this player on queens plus and ace king and have a decent read on him, we aren't running very well in the equity department. But while we had that thought process, our decision was actually a little bit flawed. We decided to call in order to let other people behind us, but I think that's even worse. I think that's going to ruin our equity post flop and end up in a lot of situations where we might be bleeding money in this spot. I think it would be much more disciplined to just fold here. But regardless, we decide to call, the small blind calls, and the under the gun player could decide to call. We come to one of the worst flops possible with pocket jacks and get ace 5 king two-toned. But somehow everyone checks to us. We know that we're almost never good here. If we bet here, we're gonna get raised by an ace, a 2 pair. Even if a flush draw decides to raise us, we're pretty much screwed. So we decide to just check it back and see a turn card. But the turn comes a beautiful jack of hearts. Now this does bring in a flush draw, so we are a little bit scared, but we know we are now beating all 2 pairs and all ace x. So when it checks to us like again, we're just going to raise for $25. Now again, this looks a little bit small, but in a multi-way pot, I'm actually a fan of this sizing. We don't want to go too big, especially since we lose a little bit of equity in a multi-way pot, even with a set. The small blind folds and both under the gun players call. The river comes the ace of spades. We get checked to again, and at this point, we know that our opponents do not have hands like ace king, ace jack, or ace five. We know that they don't have sets of aces or sets of kings. So I think our opponents are most likely going to have hands like ace queen, some kind of pocket queen's hand. Because of that, we decide to raise it up for $50. Honestly, I think this is a little bit small. We know that our passive opponents are going to have some flushes here. We know that they are going to have some ace-x here. And we know that we're not getting beaten by a lot of combinations. So we should actually be going a little bit bigger here. I think we could even go like $100 here and play for stacks. And you know, if they re-raise us, we have the odds to call, and we probably will call, knowing that we probably are going to be best versus a flush. Unfortunately, that's not what we do, and we make another value error. We end up getting a call from the under the gun player. He ends up mucking his hands after he sees that we have a full house. I think we definitely missed value here, but that's okay. We still won a decently sized pot, and that ends off our session. That was actually a pretty rough session. We ended up playing for around 6 hours and losing around $400. Now, just so you guys know, I'm not a punter. I track my statistics very diligently, and I'm not recording every single session I play. So a lot of these bad sessions, actually, funny enough, are a lot of my losing sessions, which sounds like cope, but that's just how it is. I can't really prove that to you, but you're just gonna have to take my word on that. At that time, I was actually running pretty well and had around $1,000 in profit. Unfortunately, we were kind of tapering off with these sessions because, you know, a couple of days earlier, we were at around $2,000 in profit. So these sessions definitely were bringing us down, and it definitely shows. In a lot of the hands, I make a decent amount of mistakes, and again, to reiterate, I don't show all of the hands. I have a ton of hands that I don't show on the vlog that I review in my own time, and I'm just sitting there, hands on my head, like, what the heck am I doing? So hopefully you guys can give me a little bit of grace in some of these moments. I'm just a poker player trying to improve, and hopefully I'm showing you that I'm serious about that journey. Anyways, thank you guys for coming and watching the videos. If you stuck around this long, I would love for you to hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments anything you want to discuss. If you have things that, you know, I didn't mention that I did wrong, please mention them. If you think that there's something in my videos you want to change, please feel free to comment. I try to respond to every single comment just because I think it really helps me learn and engage with the audience. And yeah, thank you guys for showing up again, and I hope you stick around. Thank you.